I remember in Normandy, this is an interesting story. In Normandy, the first town we took was called the town of Saint-Mary-Glisse. And it was a fair-sized town. And the paratroopers had landed the night before. And one paratrooper, 82nd Airborne, had his parachute caught. And there was a church in the church steeple. His had caught in the steeple. And he was hanging there in full view for hours and hours and hours. The Germans are all below. They didn't. Luckily, nobody looked up. But his name was John Steele, and he was written up in the movies. Red Buttons played his part in the movie. I think it was The Longest Day was the name of the movie, and Red Buttons played his part. But this is actually true. And later on, the town was taken. Then, of course, they released him and brought him down. There's a hotel in Saint-Mary-Glisse that's named after him, the John Steele Hotel. And when we were back there in '91, I went to Saint-Mary-Glisse and looked through there and everything. They stayed overnight in the John Steele Hotel. And the owner of the hotel, a little old lady, told me that John Steele himself and his family had back in, over the years, had been there 2 or 3 times just for a visit. Brought his family over, and quite an interesting story. But again, you have to go back later and experience these things a second time, I think, to really appreciate the significance. One thing that was strange, I remember down in Panama, as I said, we were out in the jungles all the time. And now the Panama Canal goes right across through the jungles. And, and mostly, if it was swampy, which it was most of the time, we try to get up off the ground and make a bed in the trees, so we weren't sleeping in the swamp. And so we're up in the trees quite a lot. You know, not just climbing up there to pick mangoes or bananas or coconuts or something. But one time I was up in a tree for whatever reason, I forget, and we saw going through the jungle, oh, it might have been a quarter mile away, a huge ocean liner going through the canal. All you can see is the upper part of the boat. And it seems so strange to be in the middle of a jungle, look out and see what's an ocean liner doing in the jungle. Of course, you don't realize that this is the canal and he's going through there. It's quite an odd feeling. The distressing part of the whole thing was toward the end, we saw all the survivors of the Holocaust. They were by the hundreds of thousands. We call them DPs, displaced persons. And they were all over the place. When they were released from the concentration camps, then there's no way to take care of them. They were just released and they were free. Go back home if you can. And some of you wouldn't believe the condition they were in. They looked like you take a human skeleton and just put a thin coat of skin over it and put a black and white striped uniform on them. And that's what a lot of them look like. You wonder how they lived through the conditions that got them into this position, into this condition. It's strange. We all remarked upon it. If we saw a German soldier in combat, you shoot him because he's going to shoot you if you don't. And but there's no personal feeling of hatred toward him. He was just a guy. Our general attitude was he was a guy in a different color uniform. He was like on a football field. That's the other team. Except instead of throwing footballs at each other, we're shooting guns at each other. But I know several times, especially later in the war, when the Germans were happy to surrender, to get back to a safe American camp and prisoner of war camp and get fed and taken care of, we'd take prisoners myself. Now, one thing that was necessary, we thought, every vehicle that landed for quite a while in Normandy had a piece of angle iron welded to the front bumper going up. You know what an angle iron is, like this, you know, with a V cut in it. It was up and bent over with a V cut, because the story was that the Germans would have wires strung across the road. So if you're driving down the road in a Jeep or a truck or anything, the heavy wire would take your head off. Nobody ever heard of it ever happening, but these hunks of angle iron were welded to wherever. Now I had it in front of my Jeep. And anytime I'd take prisoners, I'd stick them up sitting on the hood in front of me, holding onto that thing, because I didn't want them sitting in back of me while I'm driving the Jeep, or sitting in my driver and I sitting up front. So we'd have them up there, but we'd feed them cigarettes, chocolate bars, and they were delighted to smoke American cigarettes because they hadn't seen any for years. And chocolate bars, all this is new to them. We'd feed them chocolate and give them cigarettes and talk to them. I picked up enough German language to carry on a conversation with them. But that was our feeling toward them. Once they're captured, there are no more bad guys. It's over. So dump them off at the prisoner of war camp and keep on going, doing your business. Civilians, the German civilians are respected because they were very nationalistic. They were very patriotic. Most of them actually, toward the end, didn't have any use for Hitler. They didn't belong to the Nazi Party. The people in a position of importance, like doctors, lawyers, accountants, professional men generally, had to join the Nazi Party. Otherwise, you weren't allowed to practice. So a doctor would be automatically a member of the Nazi Party. You might hate the Nazi Party, but he had to join. The SS troops, they're the ones that wore the black uniform with the SS lightning stripes insignia. They were hated by the Americans. We'd run across them, and they were equally hated by their own German soldiers. They were the privileged class. They were given better accommodations, better food, better pay, better everything than the average German soldier. But the German soldier was generally a good soldier. They were good soldiers. Now the French public, and this was not just my opinion, we've talked over many times, the French citizens we didn't have the same respect for, because they could care less who was out there in Paris running the government. French, Germans, Americans, we don't care, as long as I'm doing all right myself. I don't care who's out there running the government. I got to pay my taxes, I don't care who I pay them to. Where the German population generally was just the opposite. They were very nationalistic and patriotic feeling, which is good. Much more like the Americans in that respect. Now, if the Russians had conquered us and we're sitting in Washington running the country, we'd be very, very unhappy about it. But the French, they could care less. As long as the guy was able to do his job and whatever, make a living, he didn't care who was in Paris running the country. Strange attitude. General McAuliffe, who was the commanding general of the 101st Airborne in Bastogne. They were completely surrounded, and they were getting bombarded all the time. And the German, whoever was in charge of the German forces, sent a request in there, a formal request for McAuliffe. Do you wish to surrender? We will accept your surrender. McAuliffe sent back a one-word answer, and being in the liaison, I was carrying all these orders, and I read the thing, just one word, nuts. And that went down in history as the shortest official Army document ever issued, probably. Before that there was a pilot in the Pacific. His name was Shea. I remember he was written up quite heavily because his report, he was flying whatever the type of, it was a Navy plane, whatever type of plane it was a fighter bomber. And he saw a submarine, German sub, and a Japanese sub rather, and sank it. So his report was, sighted sub, sank, same. that was written up all over the place, the shortest complete military report anybody ever read, until General McCall nuts. Well, because first of all, when you returned home, the basis for your return was based on this. The time when you returned home would be based on the number of decorations and so forth they had. Now, I had 7 months down in Panama, which was considered, each 6 months increment was considered one stripe on your sleeve for overseas. And so I had 2 of them because I had 7 months. And then my time over in England, then from England to Germany and so forth. So I had, and plus each stripe, each 6 months increment was worth 5 points toward discharge. And each ribbon was worth X amount of points, and each battle star was worth X amount of points. So all this added up. So I would normally have been one of the earliest to be shipped back. But because I got this infectious mononucleosis, then my own outfit went back, and I was stuck in the hospital in Heidelberg. So I was months later than my normal return home. So by the time I got home, all the glamour was gone, no more parades or anything. I just went home with a duffel bag over my shoulder, and that was, so I'm home.